The air was thin, sharp as broken glass, when the first whisper reached the old rancher's ears. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the rustle of cattle moving restless in the pens. No, it was the trembling voice of a boy, no older than 12, covered in dust, his eyes wide like he had seen something no child should ever see. "Sir, can you hide me before the devil sees me? My name is Francisco Javier, and this is the last Cangacero. Tonight, I invite you into a story carried by the wind, buried in silence, and branded deep into the heart of a forgotten ranch. If you've ever stood at the crossroads of fear and courage, if you've ever asked yourself what it means to protect another soul when your own life is already heavy with scars, this is for you. Subscribe to The Last Cangacero, leave your like, and join us because this is not just a story. This is a reckoning. The boy stood barefoot, the earth beneath him cracked and dry, the kind of soil that remembered every footprint. His breath shook as though his lungs couldn't hold enough air. His hands were raw, scraped by thorns and stones, as if he had run for miles with no place to stop. But it was his eyes, those eyes that haunted the rancher most. Eyes that carried the weight of a hunted animal. Eyes that asked a question deeper than words. What if your whole life was a closed book, and all people ever saw was the cover? The rancher had seen many things in his years. He had fought men who won his land. He had buried cattle when the drought broke them before the markets could. He had lost a son once to fever, a loss that made the nights longer than the days. But nothing had prepared him for the sound of that boy's plea. From the ridge beyond the ranch, the horizon moved. Not fast, not frantic, but steady, like the patience of a predator. A shadow stretched against the dawn, following, always following. The rancher could have closed the door. He could have said, "Go on, boy. Whatever follows you is not mine to fight." That would have been the easier path. After all, every man has enough of his own ghost to carry. But something inside him shifted, something deep and old. The boy's words had opened a wound that had never healed. The wound of watching someone innocent be swallowed by something greater, darker, and merciless. So instead of hiding him, the rancher made a choice. He grabbed the rifle leaning against the wall, mounted his horse, and looked down at the boy. "Then let him see me first." The boy didn't move, didn't breathe for a moment, as if he couldn't believe someone would say such a thing. He wanted safety. The rancher offered defiance. There is something raw, almost holy, in the moment a man decides not to hide anymore. The rancher had felt fear before, but this was different. Fear had no hold when his blood told him this was not only about the boy. This was about every decision he had ever made, every silence he had ever allowed, every battle he had walked away from. The boy climbed onto the back of the horse without another word. His small fingers clutched the fabric of the rancher's coat, trembling as though they held onto the last thread between life and death. And so they rode. The prairie stretched wide, unforgiving. Grasslands bent to the wind, whispering secrets of those who had passed before. The cattle lowed in the distance, uneasy. Somewhere behind them, the shadow moved again. The devil, whether man, beast, or something darker, was still following. Have you ever said goodbye to something that once carried your dreams? For the rancher, every hoofbeat was a reminder of the life he had built on this land, the fences he had raised, the nights he had stood guard under the stars. Yet now, he was ready to risk it all for a boy he did not know. Why? Perhaps because in the boy's terror, he saw his own son again, a son he had not been able to save. The weight of the rifle across his lap was more than steel. It was history, responsibility, a line drawn in the sand between running and standing. He knew dawn would come soon, and with it, truth. They reached a dry creek bed, the kind that cut sharp through the land like an old scar. The rancher pulled the reins and stopped. Silence pressed heavy. The boy's breath was ragged, his chest rising and falling like a bird trapped in a storm. "Sir," the boy whispered again, "if he finds me, he'll never let me go." The rancher's hand tightened around the rifle. He turned his gaze east, where the first pale light of morning began to stretch across the sky. He had no answer yet, only a promise burning in his silence. If the devil wanted this boy, he would have to walk through him first. The horizon glowed faint gold, shadows stretching long. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a sound echoed, low, steady, deliberate. Footsteps? Hooves? Or something else entirely? The boy clutched tighter. The rancher didn't move. In that fragile balance between night and morning, fear and defiance, both of them understood. There would be no hiding anymore. The first light of dawn spread across the plains like fire, seeping through cracks in the earth. The boy's chest heaved against the rancher's back, his breath uneven, his fear alive. The rancher kept his eyes on the horizon, steady, waiting. He had spent his whole life learning to read land and sky. Signs of storms, signs of drought, signs of men who came with hands full of promises but eyes full of lies. This morning, the sky carried another sign, a shadow that did not belong to wind or beast. They say silence speaks louder than thunder, and in that silence, the boy whispered again. His words were broken, caught between courage and despair. He never forgets, sir. No matter where I run, he finds me. He's not just a man. He's something worse. The rancher did not ask questions yet. He had learned long ago that truth comes when it's ready, not when it's forced. But deep inside, he felt the ground shift. If the devil was real to this boy, then somewhere, somehow, there was a story behind his terror. The wind grew colder, carrying dust into the air. The horse shifted its weight, ears twitching as though it, too, felt the presence trailing them. The rancher lifted his rifle, steady hands hardened by years of holding tools, weapons, and grief. His eyes narrowed, catching the faintest flicker of movement on the ridge. And then he remembered his own words. Then let him see me first. What does it mean to stand in the open, knowing danger stares back at you? Have you ever been in a moment when running would have been easier, yet something in your chest told you to stay? The boy's small hands trembled against his coat. His voice cracked. He told me I was his, that I couldn't leave, that even if I tried, he'd drag me back. I don't want to go back, sir. I'd rather die out here. The rancher felt his throat tighten. Memories of his lost son flooded back. The fever that came sudden, the helpless nights when prayer was answered with silence. He had been powerless then, but now, with this boy pressed against him, he felt the weight of a second chance. Dawn climbed higher, spilling light over the plains. The shadow on the ridge became clearer, no longer just a smear in the distance. A rider, tall, unhurried. The figure seemed to stretch against the sky, as though the sun itself tried to push it back but could not. The rancher's horse shifted nervously. The boy buried his face against the rancher's shoulder, too afraid to look. "He's here," the boy whispered, almost too soft to hear. The rancher kept his voice calm, even though his blood surged like fire. "Look at me, boy. You're not alone anymore." And then, with deliberate motion, he dismounted. His boots struck the dry earth. Dust rose, drifting into the air like ash. He planted himself between the boy and the advancing figure, rifle in hand, body squared against the morning light. The figure stopped at the crest of the ridge. For a long breath, the world seemed to hold still. Even the cattle in the distance fell silent, as if the land itself waited to see what would happen. The boy tugged at his sleeve, desperation in his touch. "You can't fight him," people tried. "They're gone. All gone." The rancher did not answer with words. Instead, he adjusted the rifle against his shoulder. His silence was not surrender. It was a promise. The rider began to descend. Each step of the horse echoed like a drumbeat. Dust rose with every stride. And as the figure grew clearer, the rancher saw more. A wide hat pulled low, a coat that seemed to blend into shadow, and eyes. Yes, eyes that glimmered like embers in the growing light. The boy's body shook. "He's not a man, sir. I swear it. He doesn't sleep. He doesn't bleed. He finds me in every place I hide." The rancher's grip on the rifle tightened. He had faced men before, men cruel enough to be called devils. But this was different. This was something that carried the weight of myth, of curse, of every whispered story told around fire, to warn children not to wander too far into the dark. Still, the rancher's resolve did not waver. He had already made his choice. As the rider came closer, the first rays of sun struck his face. For a moment, the illusion broke. His skin was scarred, his lips pulled tight in something between a sneer and a smile. Human, yes, but twisted by something that went beyond flesh. The boy whimpered, pressing closer to the rancher. "Why do you protect him?" The rider's voice rang out, low and sharp, carrying across the plain like steel on stone. "He belongs to me." The rancher's heart beat slow, heavy, deliberate. He raised the rifle, barrel steady, eyes locked on the figure before him. "Not today." The rider tilted his head, almost amused. His horse pawed the ground, snorting. The air thickened, as if the earth itself recoiled at his presence. The boy clutched the rancher's arm tighter, his voice a trembling thread. "He'll take us both." The rancher's jaw clenched. His breath came steady, anchored. Whatever this was, man, demon, devil, it was flesh standing before him. And flesh could fall. The first shot cracked like thunder. Dust exploded from the ridge where the rider had stood only a second before. The horse reared, but the figure did not fall. Instead, he sat tall, smiling, as if the bullet had been nothing more than a whisper. The boy gasped, burying his face against the rancher's coat. "You see? He can't be killed." But the rancher did not lower his weapon. His voice was calm, even steady as the dawn itself. "Then he hasn't met me yet." The rider urged his horse forward, closing the distance. The land between them shrank with every step, with every heartbeat. The air itself seemed to grow darker, colder, as if the light of dawn were being swallowed. And there, in that fragile space between hope and terror, the boy realized that this man, the rancher, was willing to stake his life, his land, and his soul on one simple truth, that sometimes standing is more powerful than hiding. The dawn was awake now, bleeding across the horizon in streaks of red and gold, yet the air grew colder with every breath. The boy clung to the rancher, trembling not from the chill, but from the presence of the figure who advanced slowly, deliberately, as though time itself bent to his steps. The devil, or the man who wore that name, halted only 20 paces away. His horse's hooves pressed deep into the earth, each mark a scar in the soil. He leaned forward in the saddle, his voice heavy, coated in something older than cruelty. "You think you can stand between me and what is mine? You've grown old, rancher, too old to fight the tide." The rancher did not flinch. His shadow stretched long in the rising sun, and for the first time in many years, his eyes carried no hesitation. "I buried my son once," he said, voice steady, "and I swore no child would be taken before my eyes again." The boy's breath caught, tears mixing with the dust on his cheeks. The rider smiled, slow, deliberate, a smile that didn't reach his ember-like eyes. "He begged me to let him go. I told him mercy is a chain. Chains hold tighter the more you struggle. He belongs with me. Forever." The boy cried out, his voice raw. "I don't belong to you. I never did." The land shivered with his defiance. The cattle in the distance scattered, as if even beasts understood the weight of that declaration. The rider's smile faltered for a single heartbeat. The rancher felt it. The truth. The devil fed not on flesh, but on fear, on silence, on surrender. He lowered his rifle, surprising the boy, surprising even himself. Then he stepped forward, boots crushing the dry earth, until he stood bare before the rider. "If you want him," he said, voice like stone, "you'll have to look me in the eyes and take him." The rider dismounted. The ground seemed to recoil as his boots struck the earth. He was tall, too tall, and as he approached, the light bent strangely around him, refusing to touch his skin. Yet in the harsh honesty of morning, his scars looked less eternal, more human. His breath clouded in the cold. His movements carried weight. The boy's voice cracked in desperation. "Don't. He'll kill you." But the rancher knew something the boy did not. The devil could not simply take what was freely claimed by courage. He needed submission. He needed permission. And he would never have it here. The rider stopped within reach, his hand curling into a fist. For a long, breathless moment, the two men stared at one another. The boy felt time stop, the world holding its breath. Then the rancher spoke, words carved from grief and fire. You have no claim here. Not over him. Not over me. You only own what's afraid to stand. The rider's face twisted. For the first time, rage cracked his mask. He lunged, but the rancher was ready. He swung the rifle, not as a weapon of bullets, but as a staff of will. The stock struck the rider across the face, sending him staggering back. The boy gasped as dust exploded, the devil's form shuddering in the morning light. The rancher didn't wait. He pressed forward, striking again, each blow fueled by every loss, every ghost, every silence he had ever endured. The rider stumbled, his ember eyes flickering weaker with each strike. And then, with the final blow, the rancher forced him to the ground. The earth swallowed the silence. The rider lay there, not vanquished but broken. His eyes no longer burned, only smoldered, as though the dawn itself had stripped him of power. He looked up at the boy, his voice no longer booming but hoarse, almost human. You'll never outrun me. I'll always be waiting in the shadows. The boy stepped forward, knees shaking, yet his voice steadier than it had ever been. Then I'll stop running. The rider's face twisted, and with the rising sun burning against him, he faded, his figure breaking apart into dust and shadow, carried away by the wind. Silence. The boy collapsed to his knees, sobbing, not from fear, but from release. The rancher placed a hand on his shoulder, steady, grounding. For the first time, the boy felt what it meant to belong, not as a possession, but as a life worth protecting. The prairie was quiet again, yet forever changed. Tracks in the dirt told of what had stood there, of what had been faced. And though no one would believe the story, the land itself remembered. The rancher looked at the boy, eyes soft yet resolute. You're free now, but freedom is a road. You walk it, step by step, and you never let fear ride behind you again. The boy nodded through tears, clutching the rancher's coat. He knew then that dawn was not just the breaking of day, it was the breaking of chains. And as they stood together in the light, the rancher whispered one last truth. Because sometimes what got left behind is exactly what could have changed everything. My name is Francisco Javier, and this was The Last Cangaceiro. If this story moved you, subscribe, leave your like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me, have you ever stopped running from something that chased you for too long? And when you finish here, don't walk away. Watch the 2 videos I've left for you, stories with echoes of the same fight, of shadows, choices, and the courage to stand. Because the past is never silent, and neither are those who dare to face it.